Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Dinner was great. I gave everyone their presents amid much hullabaloo. The kids looked at me kind of weird after looking into their bags. I donned a similar bag that I'd made up for myself and took them out to the barn. There I'd set up a couple of screw-in eye bolts to make this work. I ran a cord from high to low and tied it off. The poncho went over it. Underneath that went a folded-up OD-wool U.S. Army blanket wrapped in a small canvas tarp. That's a tent called a plowpoint style. You need to secure the outer edges with stakes or weights so the wind doesn't catch underneath. Sleeping in it as it is, you'd get really cold. You need a sleeping pad under the blanket to keep you off the ground or concrete. The ground always holds moisture, which draws heat away from your body. I built a small fire on a sheet of steel using flint and tinder, then lit the wood with a candle stub. The fire is placed perfectly to reflect heat back into the tent. Now, I'm going to put it out since we don't want smoke inside the barn. I used a big flat shovel and my shoe to scrape the burning wood onto the shovel, then heaved it out the door. Normally, you'd dig a shallow hole and surround it with rocks. Then you can place your pot of water on the rocks to heat it up for making tea, soup, or cooking food. Only in strong wind would you make the fire hole deeper, because otherwise all the heat would rise straight up and not keep you warm. Using a few logs, I built a heat reflector. When it's cold, you want a reflector on the opposite side of the fire. Think of a fireplace. It has 3 sides reflecting heat. If you have reflectors around you like in the corner of an old stone cabin, you'll stay warm easily. I showed them a hand net with a stick tied to the handle using some twine. You can use it to catch food from the pools. Then drop the catch into a pot with water, cook it, and eat. There are shellfish, small lobsters, and all sorts of things to gather. I picked up a small hatchet for cutting firewood and opening shells. It's very sharp, so be careful not to cut yourself. The handkerchief is for cleaning up and for handling hot pots safely. Never pick up a hot pot with a wet cloth. You could get steam burns. I'll teach you how to cook a potato over the fire or make a simple pudding. We'll do this over the fireplace. Are you guys following so far? I got grins and enthusiastic nods. Good. This is just the start. Once it warms up, I'll take you out and show you the real thing. We'll stay out overnight a few times. Then I'll let you loose on your own. Every once in a while I'll teach you something new. Once you've proved to me that you've learned it, we'll go on to something else. Okay, more grins and nods. Good. Let's go back inside before your mom gets worried. I cleaned up my mess and followed them back inside. I'd teach them how to make a fire using the fireplace, where it was dry and there was no wind. Then we'd try it in the real world. I had gotten them little shovels and a hank of paper toweling for camp sanitation and little bottles of soap. Now I had to teach them how, when, where, and why to use it. Sanitation, first aid, fire starting and safety, staying warm on cold or frozen ground, building a trash hut that was warm and waterproof, how to check for snakes, how to capture and get rid of a snake. There were all sorts of field tasks that I'd set them. In a couple of years, once they got some arm length and strength, I'd teach them to use the ATL. Then no raccoon, rabbit, squirrel, or porcupine would be safe. I'd have to check for any diamond willow growths. If there weren't any, I'd have to import some. They made absolutely great arrows. Pecking arrowheads took a long time to learn. I didn't know if I tried to teach them that or not. Fletching was hard enough. Diamond willow made great supports for a wickiup, too. Once we got back inside, Juliana noticed that the kids were happy, so she was happy. I invited Clara to stay a couple of days to give Juliana an adult female to talk to. I pretty much gave her carte blanche to visit whenever she wanted to. As far as I was concerned, the first guest bedroom had her name on it. It got brutally cold that January. The temperatures dropped well below zero and stayed there. The gale force winds didn't help much, either. The snow drifted the road, closed almost as soon as Mark had it plowed out. We gave it up as a bad job and pulled our heads in. I worried about the LP gas tanks lasting the winter. We turned back all the heaters to 50 degrees and went about in jackets. Heating pads made all our beds comfortably warm. Since the kids were 8 years old, I'd purchased some homeschooling kits and had them doing their lessons at the library table most days. They didn't bitch too much. They realized that they'd be bored to screaming fits without something to pass the time. I had them do more reading and book reports than the curriculum demanded. It increased their vocabularies and sped up their reading. I spent a couple of $1,000s on an old Encyclopedia Britannica before they split into a Macropedia and Micropedia, thus confusing damn near every school kid in the Western world. I latched onto a 1976 edition for $200. It cost $1,600 to ship it to us. Man, was that one pissed off UPS driver. I'll bet he thought I was smuggling anvils. I bought a big Webster's dictionary, the kind that sits on its own pedestal with a half-globe magnifier. The kids were afraid to touch it, so I bought them a collegiate dictionary and left it on the library table. The kids ate it up. They were reading the encyclopedia for something to do. That was worth the price. They learned English, math, geography, biology, Spanish, and music. I could sing a fair bit, so I ran that class. I asked Juliana if she played any instruments. She shyly said the flute. Well, hell. I spent a day in Bangor visiting music stores. I found what appeared to be a very nice flute for about $1,200. I bought it, put a ribbon around the case with a bow on it, and left it under her pillow. The next morning, I beheld a screaming, jumping Juliana that tried to hug me to death. I caught her smiling much more often after that. She'd sold her precious flute to feed her kids while working at that hotel. In my ignorance, I'd gotten her a much nicer instrument. The kids already had a jump on biology. Watching a bitch have puppies tends to do that. They were too young to get started on any anatomy or the Krebs cycle or any of that stuff, but I did teach them veins from arteries while getting some first aid into their heads. They knew what germs were, versus bacteria versus viruses. I asked the local doc to show them what lives in our gut to get them used to the idea of symbiotic organisms. I pointed out that a couple structures in cell biology were likely adopted from external microorganisms to make our cells more efficient. We dissected a rabbit to figure out what all the goopy bits did. I got them learning the states and capitals. Addition and subtraction was a breeze. Multiplication was going to take a while. Division was the devil's work. Not bad for third grade. When the weather broke, I went into town for card games, fresh fruit, fatty meat for the dogs, vinegar, sugar, and cabbage. I made coleslaw by the pound, and everybody scarfed it up. It hit the spot in the middle of winter, crunchy, sweet, sour, and with a little musty and bitter aftertaste from the ground-up celery seed. We played Uno and Kings in the corner. Every time the kids rattled something off at me in Spanish, I rattled off something at them in French, thoroughly confusing them. I heard that's not fair. A lot. Suck wind, kid. I kept bugging the kids to keep the bird feeder, squirrel feeder, and deer manger filled. The animals really did depend on them. They were habituated to eating there and didn't have the reserves to find food elsewhere. They'd die if the kids screwed off. I let them know it, too. I baked the fatty meat long enough to start rendering the fat. I added a couple packages of beef ribs and cooked them as well. The dogs feasted until they groaned. They needed the fat meat in the cold. Their kibble just wasn't cutting it. The kids and I spent a couple of nights sleeping with the dogs. At first it confused them, but then they partied. We slept in a big puppy pile and had a fine time. Mom, however, enforced a shower regimen once we got back in the house. After that we visited the calves with half-coffee cans of ground grain and salt. We petted them for a while and went back to the house. Showers again. Winter time on a farm in the winter isn't all drudgery. There's tobogganing and lots more. I wanted to start some organized exercises. I'd always been interested in Tai Chi. The library had a DVD on it. I took it home, studied it, and did my best. I wasn't very good, but I kept trying. I found a self-defense shop that specialized in Taekwondo. The young fellow running it knew Tai Chi and was willing to give me some pointers, for a price. What the hell? He was a businessman and we both knew it. He got me going on the right path. After 4 weeks of practice, once per day under his watchful eye he called me adequate. I almost shot the scumsucker. I went on to teach the kids what I'd learned. Pretty soon I noticed that the kids were getting bored. I said screw it. I bought 2 50-pound sacks of white beans and strapped them to the tops of 2 weighted wooden barrels. I had the kids punch the bags for 10 minutes every night, then 20 minutes, then 30 minutes. I watched them and had them change from a straight punch to a punch through the body line, kicking off of 1 foot, to a punch through, to a punch with a twist. They were getting some muscles. I added push-ups and sit-ups to their PT. I hung a little bell from a string about shoulder high to the kids. I toe-kicked it, knocking it against the ceiling. I had them work at it until they could do it at will. Then I raised the bell. I taught them the snap kick, the bicycle or cheerleader kick, the side kick, and the roundhouse kick. They were getting pretty good. They had some speed coming along. Come spring, I had a heavy bag put in. They took out a lot of aggression on that thing. When the weather got nice enough so that we wouldn't get lung burned, I taught them how to run Indian fashion, on the balls of their feet, one behind the other. It's more efficient. Bored kids on a farm will do damn near anything to stay occupied. I proved it. For their birthdays, I enrolled them in a karate dojo. They learned all the basics and the proper discipline. Then they started learning the forms. They complained to me that the master was taking his time and going slow. I gave him an extra grand to keep them motivated. Kim almost injured himself when he misjudged a move during practice and accidentally struck himself. He called me in. What exactly have you been teaching these kids? Beanbag straight punch, through punch, twist punch. Kick the bell straight kick, bicycle kick, side kick, and roundhouse. Plus push-ups, sit-ups, and running hard. They've nearly destroyed the heavy bag I bought 3 months ago. Jesus, they're aggressive enough for a wolf pack. I'll get them started on the next set of forms right away. I just hope I can keep them focused. I started them with Tai Chi. Use that as a mechanism to ground them. Teach them center and ground, awareness, and the forms. They'll be fine. Yeah, but what about me? I grinned and slapped his shoulder. Somebody's got to pull the plow. Looks like you're elected. Look at it this way. After this, you'll be able to teach anyone but a slug. Juliana was worried. Harvey, what are the kids doing at night? I've got them going to a karate dojo. I don't want them to be vulnerable to any predators, and since they don't have much peer interaction, I don't want them to be bullied, either. This will give them confidence and the skills to back up any arguments they may get into. Won't they turn into bullies instead? Nope. The training's designed to stop that. Besides, if I see it happen, I'll straighten them right out. Have you trained like this? I smiled and nodded. I look all normal, don't I? I've got 2 black belts. If I pick up a heavy stick, then it's all over for the other guy, unless he's quite special. Then I'll stand off and shoot him. She didn't look convinced. Come out to the conservatory. I want you to start learning something. It's called Tai Chi, and it's a slow-motion martial art. Juliana looked a lot more confident after that lesson. We kept it up every other afternoon. The kids joined in and cheered on their mom. I taught them a couple of nasty little self-defense moves, such as the jumping side kick, designed to send someone to the hospital with a screwed-up knee, and the heel strike, which would shatter a jaw if delivered correctly. I had them practice the heel strike against a round of wood. The heel of the hand can take and deliver a lot of force. A practiced individual strengthens the structure of the wrist in practice before delivering a full power shot. That power shot can shatter an 8-inch round pine log section. Within a year, they were ready for power training. Mom watched as the 2 of them ripped the cladding off the heavy bag, and the stuffing went everywhere. Okay, you're officially dangerous. Remember what we said about bullies and becoming your own worst enemy? You're there now. If you go mad dog on anyone, the police will shoot you and ask questions later. Understand? Yep, they understood. The kids were bored. I showed them some stuff I knew with the bow stick. I taught them how to start a fire with flint and steel, a digging stick and a board, and a spinning stick in a couple of ways. I always fall back on flint and steel and showed them a couple of ways to get the job done. We used char cloth, sulfur sticks, candle stubs, wax charred cloth, charred rope and a keeper, fungus and paper that had been rubbed with gunpowder while damp as the agent between the spark and the tinder. I taught basic sanitation, first aid, wound cleaning, and stopping a bleeder. We didn't have anybody with a broken limb to practice on, so we used a broken stick inside a canvas cover. Flailed chest got them, but flailed chest gets everyone. Once the rib cage is shattered, it's goodnight Gracie unless the hospital is right there. They were surprised at how vicious I was when puncturing a chest with a trocar needle to reinflate a collapsed lung. Reducing a disjointed shoulder or hip also threw them. You've got to tire out the muscle to stretch it enough, else it will never pop back in, and then the crushed vessels and nerves around the dislocation will wreak havoc. We built trash shelters and spent the night in them. In the cold spring rain. They work a lot better with a piece of canvas on the inner layer, let me tell you. I taught them how to identify chert by the glassy, smooth surfaces of a fresh break. I demonstrated how to nap an arrowhead. I demonstrated how to select a campsite that wouldn't kill you or leave you vulnerable to the wind, rain, or snow. We drew clean water 3 ways. I showed them how to boil hide in oil to stiffen it up enough to use as fletching that would refuse to die. I demonstrated how to fletch an arrow using vegetable twine and hide glue. I didn't force them to make their own arrowheads. Crazy Crow Company sells willow leaf iron blades. They need the aid of a grinder to put an edge on them, but the shape and size is perfect for an ATL dart. Next was the big one. How to use an ATL and hit what you aimed at. By the time I was done with that lesson, they were a couple of dangerous little scum-suckers. However, they were the masters of their domain. They were comfortable in the woods and could survive there for weeks at a time. They were a far cry from the frightened kids I'd met years before. Mama Juliana was pretty happy. Her kids were confident and well on their way to adulthood. They tended to think about things before opening their mouths and had the moral strength to stand their ground. They were a lot better off than I'd been at their age. They were 15. Meanwhile, back to our timeline. Once the ground thawed and dried out enough, Mark and I planted the garden. We alternated on taking morning and evening critter patrol. It was a lot easier this year with 2 people than the drudge of day in, day out that I'd had to carry last year. Our smokehouse thrived thanks to the local wildlife. Mostly, we caught rabbits and raccoons. We also hunted several full-sized deer, which we butchered, cured, and smoked. After soaking the carcasses in salt for a couple of weeks to draw out moisture, we hung them and cold smoked them over a corncob fire. This method is a southern tradition, Many hams have been smoked over corncob fires through the years. I thought about my project to make the kids woods aware. My goal was to make them short buckskinners. I ordered tanned deer skins, 2 fur-on bear skins, an 18-foot teepee with the pole set, and the full set of Mark Baker Woods Runner DVDs. The guy did 4 DVDs focusing on the skills of an early American Eastern long hunter. I found some small format paper-bound books on flint knapping, harvesting, and butchering deer, cordage, fire making, and why a canvas tarp is your best friend. I dug out my old Buckskinner books volumes 1 through 6, all the old Foxfire books I'd been able to collect, and found a couple sources for clothing patterns. I bought a few single-color woolen blankets in dark blue, dark green, and gray to use as materials for capotes and cloaks. I bookmarked where to find oilskin tarps and overcoats. I'll never give up my oilskin poncho, even today now that I've left buckskinning behind me. I convinced the Friends of Shields Island to buy into the Pioneer Village idea, focusing on the history of Shields Island. The documentation from the old chest sealed the deal once I proposed to display it in their new visitors center. With their approval, I got the pads poured for the visitors center, a few buildings, and a big stone not brick barn on their side of the fence not far from my second barn and facilities. I got my contractor started on the smithy and kitchen on my side of the fence. I had 2 gates put into the fence connecting the 2 built-up areas. By midsummer, the buildings were ready. I hired a couple of guys that helped run Museum Village in Monroe, New York, and Hale Farm Village in Bath, Ohio to come and give us some oversight to get set up. I thought about getting someone from the Shaker Village in Bardstown, Kentucky, but from what I recalled while attending university in Lexington, it was a static display. They brought plans for the blacksmithy, church, and sawmill that I wanted to set up. I had pictures of the old farm kitchen to go by, and the formal dining room as well. For a rural farm village in the 1860s, they suggested a few squared beam log cabins, such as the Foxfire books illustrated. They brought pictures and construction plans. They also suggested a small timber-framed church with clapboards and a pot-bellied stove, or 2. This being Maine, we ended up putting in 4. I paid them to track down and hire a crew to buy and install a loom and a 5-seat spinning wheel. These were called spinning circles. The spinsters would spin the wool for the weaveress. I remember something about stringing a loom being the most difficult, time-consuming operation involved in working with a loom. We needed to buy raw wool and spun wool. I hired the timber framing group they suggested to raise the church. They did a very nice job. I had photographs taken as they worked and assembled an exhibit within the church. The pews were not fastened down, giving the village a multi-use structure as had been done in some locations at the time. There was a dais, rail, and pulpit, but it was all left quite plain. It was never consecrated as a church and simply left an impression of a non-denominational house of worship. The 3rd, stone barn and visitors center were started at the north end of the island. Our sawmill was purchased and rebuilt. We used recycled barn and factory timbers placed on a gravel pad in the south end complex. I purchased and had installed a reproduction of an early 1800s steam engine called a Corliss engine. It had a bloody huge flywheel and had a reputation for high efficiency. I had a 5-ton coal bunker built near the steam engine and had it filled. This would easily supply our blacksmithy as well. I called around and found a timber company willing to supply a limited number of clean logs for our sawmill operation. The first few dozen logs worth of timber went to provide beams and floors for the new structures and would to make up the mangers, floors, beams, and walls in the new stone barn. Once we got the kinks out of the operation, we drilled and pegged where we could, especially while setting the beams and support structures in the barn. They would prove to be the most visible. The soap-making operation was provided with a large kettle on a chain and tripod, suet and leaf lard, boiling tubs, forms, cotton cloth, and lye. The candle-making operation was set up for dipped and molded candles. We needed a wood carver for all the spoons, paddles, trenchers, and all the other little things that the farm required. The kitchen and living room were laid out in the same building. A local blacksmith made the traveling crane and the fire tools. I located and purchased the stove, granite wet sink, pots, jugs, bottles, trenchers, oven sheets, pans, tins, molds, burl bread bowls, and the big kitchen work table we'd need for the kitchen. An estate sale provided the dining table, lowboy or butler's table, and chairs for the formal dining room. I sent out the parts of the chandelier to be strung and prepared for hanging on a pulley and windlass above the dining table. I bought more linen tablecloth for the dining table and an 8-piece blue Delft tableware set, as well as the water glasses, wine glasses, and tableware. I remembered to get a candle snuffer to light and put out the candles. I contracted with a blacksmith to move a simple coal forge and anvil to the site and demonstrate on the weekends when we were in operation and on special circumstances. We provide the coal and raw materials. The visitors center was completed, the auditorium and its projection equipment were installed, and the documentary exhibits were finished for the time. I hired a few locals to man the stations for a live fire exercise. The Shieldsport High School was going to deliver 3 busloads of kids with chaperones on our doorstep that Friday morning. I wandered around in a black sack suit, white shirt, and ribbon tie. A la Colonel Sanders, I wore lace-up, low-heeled boots, and carried a cane. I introduced myself as the owner and talked about the site at the Visitors Center and shepherded the oldest group around the site, explaining what they saw. I was doing the job of a professional site interpreter. I was glad that I'd put up signs on the second barn stating that it was a maintenance structure and to please stay out. We hadn't locked the damn thing. I noted that we'd forgotten a few necessary things. We didn't have any outdoor seating for people to rest, and we'd forgotten the damned outhouses. We didn't have any for the reenactors or the guests. I also noted that we didn't have any shelters in case of rain, either. The only restrooms were in the Visitors Center, and they weren't enough to handle the load. Next year I'd contract with an agency. I figured out where to put a couple picnic shelters with fireplaces. Other than that, we agreed that we did pretty well for a first run-through. It had taken long enough to get to this stage that the first snow flew soon after our run-through. We shut it down for the season. A wooden structure was quickly built over the steam engine and a canvas shelter went over the coal bunker. Within the month, the stone barn was finished. I had half of the first floor filled with face cords of split hardwood. I had both of the septic tanks at the reception center and the house pumped out for the year. Mark's LP gas tank got refilled, as did my 2 tanks. I had an artist make larger ink renderings of some of the illustrations that had been in the trunk. I wanted to use these to gather more interest in the documentation and compare what was to what we built. I kept careful track of all the bills and receipts for the operation. Since it all went to the LLC, it was taken off my income tax as a donation. We started advertising the place as a spring to fall static exhibit during the week with live demonstrators during the weekends and on holidays. I figured that once we got into the groove, we'd open it up a bit more and run live by appointment as well. I had a field plowed flat with a slight pitch and covered in 6 inches of crushed stone, close by the Visitors Center. That would keep us from having to pull people's cars out of the mud. Mark and Juliana, bless them, had kept up with the garden while I was fighting the farm village startup. The first hard freeze arrived, and the steers were sent to the butcher. The kids were a little uneasy at first, but we explained everything carefully. We had all winter to prepare the pen for 5 or 6 piglets. We needed to bury barbed wire around the perimeter because pigs naturally root around. We also had to build shelters, set up a watering station, and provide a wet trough for feeding. To get them through the winter, a heated manger was necessary. I wouldn't leave any animal outside in that kind of weather during the cold months. Once the truck came back from the packing plant, we made an emergency run to Lowe's. We needed 2 more chest freezers to hold all the beef. The ground hadn't frozen too deeply yet, so I took advantage of my contractor's slowdown and trade to get a foundation dug and poured, then the spinning and weaving house built. A fireplace was built into the spinning room, and both a big high-backed fireplace settle and a single spinning wheel were added near the hearth. I recall reading in the estate journals an account of the children going to sleep to the sound of the spinning wheel. That page would be reproduced large and added to the display. I made a decision that I'd have to convince the Shields Island people to run with. Most of our displays should all have been built into one big building with a double course brick or stone first floor followed by frame and clapboard floors above that. Damn it. I wanted the farmhouse at the north end and the outbuildings other than the barn, which was already there, to be at the south end. This would mean building the farmhouse, moving the displays inside it, and tearing down some of the smaller structures that we'd already built. If we ensured an electrification of the house, be wide doors and corridors, and copyright an elevator at one end for the wheelchair-bound, we might get put onto a national register. That would sure be a feather in our caps. I had spent several $1 million on the project, and it was almost matching my vision, but it wasn't quite rational yet. There were conspicuous holes in the flow of how a farm of the period would operate. There was yet to be built a bunkhouse for the field hands, a small house for the foreman, a bathhouse, a woodworking shop, and a stable with an attached paddock for the mules. There were no farm carts or buckboards. Where were the plow and the drag? Where were the cooper and wheelwright? There should be an office for the guy that doctored the people, cut their hair, and pulled their teeth, as well as doctoring to the stock. Where was the dining hall for the field hands? Where was the latrine for the field hands? There should be a farm office for scheduling and accounting. Where were the cooks and the housekeepers to sleep? Where was the schoolhouse for the kids? Should we have a firehouse? I documented it all. We had a ways to go yet. However, our first step had been a giant one. I was going to turn my face away from it for a while. I needed to stand back and look at it with a different viewpoint. I bought a couple of sun loungers and a small table for the conservatory. I was lying back, trying to catch some tan between the sun and the halide lamps. I was relaxing with a bourbon and Coke, dressed in my bathing trunks. I was comfortable. Juliana came in and sat on the other lounger. Are you done yet? Done with what? She gave a careless wave towards the other barn. All that. I cast an eye her way. Not done. Just in hiatus. I'm letting it rest. Can I ask you something? Sure. I may waffle a bit if I'm uncomfortable with the subject, but you can certainly ask. Why have you done all this? Why not just sit back and live the high life? You must have the bucks considering how you've spent money on this project. Why not live in the Caribbean or on a cruise liner or something? Why live out here in the boonies? I smiled as I looked at her. She really didn't get it. I've got 2 reasons. 1, the quiet. I'm addicted to the quiet. Some night when it's clear, cold and crisp and the stars are shining so brightly that you feel that you could reach out and touch one. Just listen. Listen for anything. You won't hear it. You may catch the sound of the waves lapping against the shore. If you're unlucky, you'll catch the sound of a ship's horn. That's it. Blessed silence. You can't buy that anymore. The other reason I'm afraid you'll laugh at. You see, I had, for lack of a better word, a vision. It was a brief burst of clarity in which I saw this place as it was, and as it could be, one of the last true self-sufficient farms, with the facilities to show interested people how their great-grandparents lived and what they thought natural and proper. I've had a few missteps and a few misinterpretations, but all in all it's coming together. The few holes are quite glaring to me. I've been writing them up in a to-do list, but I want to let everything percolate before I make any big decisions. After all, this is a Maine farm village, not in Georgia. The slave economy and management legacies just weren't there. The mattresses were filled with corn husks and straw ticking, not cotton or rice straw. Pot-bellied stoves or legacy Franklin stoves were everywhere. There was a lot more fish and chicken in their diet than beef or pork. Those were cash crops, so to speak. Sunday dinner could just as well be salt cod and potatoes as anything else. In the South, including Texas, Reconstruction and the carpetbaggers destroyed much of what was left of the previous landowners' culture, as well as their farms and plantations. The Indian Wars across the Great Plains, the Transcontinental Railroad opening in 1869 and subsequent laying of the vast network of local lines, the San Francisco Fire of 1906, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and near simultaneous burn-off of most of northern Wisconsin, the Alaskan Gold Rush of 1897. All these things provided a tremendous amount of energy for change throughout the rest of the nation. Before those such as Henry Ford and Thomas Edison changed transportation and began electrification, before World War I denuded the country of mules, the way of life outside of towns in the East didn't really change from about 1865 to 1914. That's a long damn time. True, the mills changed with the advent of steam-powered engines for power, better stoves took over the kitchens, and fashions definitely changed, but that's about all. That magical stability gave people a multi-generational false sense of security. The world changed around them, and when it finally impacted their lives, they didn't quite know what to do about it. I wish I could see the newspapers from 5 years after the break in our documentation. The changes must have been dramatic. So, does that mean you're a historian? I thought about it a minute. Not at first, but I suppose that I became one once I got interested. Now, with all these public access modifications, I'm beginning to feel threatened. I'm going to have another fence built to enforce my privacy here at the house. I don't want dirty-fingered tourists peering through the windows. Let's go look at the master map and decide where the fence line should run. We got up and walked over to the office. I still kept the master map there on the wall. I wanted to minimize the public land and maximize the private, yet leave room for future expansion. I drew a curving line with my finger, encompassing the buildings, orchards, and rendezvous site. Why include the rendezvous area and the orchards on the public side? Because buckskiners like flatlanders to come and visit, spend some money. A lot of them spend the winter time at crafts that they can sell for their gas money, if nothing else. People swap, trade, sell, and bargain all through a rendezvous. It's an early American flea market. Cool. I looked her over. You'd look great in a bleached leather dress with some beadwork. Let me show you what I mean. I walked out to the shelves where my rendezvous books were and found the buckskinning books. I forgot which one had the women's garments, so I pulled the first 4 and settled down at the table. She followed curiously. I found the pictures I was looking for, turned the book around, and slid it over to her. I could wear something like this. Sure. There are loads of patterns, and the skins are available. The beading is a skill, though, and we might have to look around for someone to do it if you don't care to learn yourself. Wait here. I went back to my bedroom and opened up a suit carrier I had stuffed at the back. Within were my breeches, linen shirts, Westcott's colonial vests, socks, and silk headscarves. I dressed to the period, put on my rough-out brogans, found my rendezvous possibles bag, dug out my neck knife in its beaded sheath, put the knife around my neck, and put the bag over my shoulder. I walked back out and stood there looking at her. She looked dumbfounded. This is a whole different side of you. I never would have expected this. Period dress is just that, designs and materials limited to the period. We restrict them to mostly linen, some cotton and silk, wool, leather and oilskin. Much of the clothes are handmade, including the shoes. These are pegged together and assembled on a cobbler's bench, then turned inside out to wear. They started out as buckle shoes, but the buckles hurt my feet, so I converted them to lace-ups. I had metal taps put on the heels because I kept wearing the leather heels down so fast. I dug down into my possibles bag for something I kept there. Ah, found it. I withdrew a heavy amber necklace. You should wear this with your Indian dress, along with a beaded belt, as well as a knife and leather punch with the sheaths decorated in dyed porcupine quills. I brought up the Crazy Crow catalog online to show her where they could be bought. She grinned. This is really cool. No wonder you're hooked on it. But I'm a little blonde to be an Indian princess, don't you think? Nope. Virtually all the native tribesmen were fascinated with blonde hair. You would have been captured as a child and brought up in the tribe. She nodded. Now, some of the skills a good buckskinner should know are how to build a camp, set up their lodge, build and use a fire, safely, throw a knife, throw a hawk or tomahawk, and speak a few phrases in French. French was the trade tongue for nearly a century on this continent, and, I believe, Quebec just carried on the tradition, making it their common language. That's why Canadian signs and packaging are bilingual. Did you know that the Cajuns that settled Florida and Louisiana were distressed Newfoundlanders that lost their homes in the war? That's to the best of my understanding. That's how the Cajun French came to be. It wasn't from French settlers in the Gulf. I'll pull some phrases in French for you with translations. You memorize them, and we'll drive the kids bats hit. Deal? I'd not seen her with an evil grin before. Deal. The next time I was online, I did a little shopping at Crazy Crow. They had good quality copper cooking kettles at a reasonable price, the deerskins I wanted, beaded sheaths and canvas water buckets for campfire duty. All the rendezvous that I've ever attended have one specific line built into their rules. A full water bucket will be near every campfire. Notice it's not should, it's will. I placed a phone call to the folks at Crazy Crow to see if they had anyone that would beat a dress or do some quill work for a good price. They had a few leads and agreed to broker the jobs for me. Since it was winter time, they would be working or alternatively, may want a few commissions. I thought seriously about the displays at the Visitors Center. It was too Shields Island-centric. I wanted to expand it to link in the other driving cultural events of the time, namely the Civil War. I would feel like a cad if I asked for the Civil War militaria back, so I didn't do it. Instead, I had the journal copied, found a resource for battlefield photographs of the time, and had an artist sketch out the scenes noted in the journal. Some were chillingly like the pictures that I'd found. I had the artist do some rotations without referring to the pictures. A sketch from the journal writer's viewpoint was presented first, then a rotation that matched the picture that was presented third in line, next to the previous sketches. It was an amazingly effective exhibit. I had a very heavy, vault-class display case installed with multiple layers of armored glass in the front. Why the glass? After all, it was a display case. Within I hung the rifles that I'd inherited, as well as some reproductions of the period, such as the Winchester 1885 high-wall falling block rifle in .45-70 and a more common brass frame Henry in .44 RF, which the Southerners were reputed to have said the damned Yankees would load on Sunday and shoot all week. The 1874 Sharps with a Creedmoor sight was displayed, highlighting a few blemishes. The incidents leading to those blemishes were noted in the sniper's journal, almost in an apologetic manner, giving provenance to the weapon on display. The peripheral display contained cartridge boxes, paper boxes, copies that the bullets were bought in, examples of various cartridges of the times compared to modern cartridges, and some photographs of what those weapons were used for. The photographs of the battlefield at Shiloh were particularly riveting when placed alongside a quote noting that one could walk across the battlefield without touching the ground, simply by shifting from corpse to corpse. I wrote about how some of the returning veterans were quite abrupt with the non-combatants that stayed behind. The journals of several local ministers noted that many fell to midnight justice, but the papers never even whispered about it. That's one display which I did not have illustrated. One newspaper article did note that the returning soldiers were all thin and somewhat pale. They all had a presence about them. They were watchful and quick to act. None cared to stand while framed in silhouette. With the heady prospect of possibly being entered into a national register, the board of the Friends of Shields Island gladly signed on to the changes. It meant a little more electrification, a few more acres dedicated to the project, and a better road put into the parking lot. But they agreed. After all, it was all on my dime. I hired an out-of-state architect familiar with Civil War period building construction, rehabilitation, and reproduction. He knew exactly where I was coming from when I told him to keep the plantation feel out of it, as this was to represent a working farm estate grown into a small village. I went down the pages of my notes with him, noting which outbuildings had yet to go up and what trade-offs were to be allowed in building the big farmhouse. I insisted that the roof be done in slate. The most glaring anachronism, of course, was the elevator. It was disguised as a closet, and the back wall was to be covered in shelves. One feature of the antebellum South was adopted as it made sense. The kitchen for the workers was built into the basement, making use of the house flues and ovens. A smaller version of our root cellar was to be included in the basement. It was to have a heavy paved floor and glazed brick, and the walls were to be done in tiles. 2 4-burner wood stoves and a huge table would be the focus of the place. The upper walls would feature many windows for illumination, as well as many kerosene lanterns on dedicated shelves high on the walls, as the kitchen usually started business at 4 a.m. I wondered what the hell to do about a cold house. The stream that the original settlement was built around had at its head a spring. We'd have to find it, isolate it, and build a spring house around the damned thing. It wouldn't be conveniently adjacent to the kitchens as it should be, but there would be a spring house. It couldn't be built in cast stone cement. It would have to be built in riven stone and dry laid to keep the yearly freezes from turning it into gravel. There were all sorts of pocket industries which, while necessary to have available, could not be supported with the headcount a village such as ours would provide. The products from such industries as cobblers, coppersmiths, wheelwrights, clockmakers, and dedicated tailors would be imported. Outsourcing was not a new idea. We needed a woodwright that also could carve spoons and such. The woodwright and the blacksmith together might be able to fashion a wagon wheel, but not as elegantly or as timely as a professional wheelwright would who had templates and tools dedicated to the job. A cooper was a necessary member of the community as he made the buckets, barrels, firkins, pails, and churns for the community. He stayed busy. With such a surplus of widows from the war needing food and shelter, spinsters were common, and hosting them was considered an act of charity. Their children were brought up in the farming community. Some gained worthwhile skills such as what the cooks, the cooper, the woodwright, or the blacksmith could teach, thus making a place for themselves on the farm. Others remained as field hands while others yet attempted to find their fortune out west or in the factories of the larger cities. I found a source for many pot-bellied stoves. We'd need them. I also found a supplier for McGuffey readers and wood-framed slates for the schoolhouse. Several companies had period machine-woven runners for the halls of the farmhouse. I roughed out the doctor's office in a corner of the stone barn and bought supplies for it. I found a reproduction case Civil War surgeon's kit and a case of equipment and herbs for pill rolling. The dental kit was quite brutal in its appearance and effectiveness. A stained leather apron hung in the corner of the physician's office. Bottles lined the shelves of a glass-fronted cabinet labeled paregoric, opium, tincture of tea, ether, alcohol, slippery elm, quinine, catnip, olive oil, valerian, belladonna, laudanum, tannin, gum arabic, ipecac, digitalis, chamomile, sarsaparilla, blackberry leaf, boneset, feverfew, willow bark, ground mustard seed, flaxseed, honey, and calomel. There was even a brand new, top-of-the-line ether cone. An alcohol lamp was ready to melt gum arabic to make sticking plasters and soften the beeswax to make pills. A small brass balance scale with tiny weights and a pair of forceps was fastened to the desk. 2 cots lay against the walls, and another cabinet was full of bedding, towels, and roll bandage. A certificate of accomplishment of a 2-year medical apprenticeship was fastened to the wall within a glass frame. Several books were shelved on the desk on such subjects as anatomy, the treatment of fevers and agues, the pharmacy of the modern practitioner, herbal remedies, difficult childbirths, and amputation. I spent some of the winter digging through period cookbooks, such as copies of White House cookbooks and Pennsylvania Dutch works published for the buckskinning market. I printed, laminated, and bound a practical cookbook for use in the village kitchens. I made certain to include recipes for things that the residents of the time would have thought silly, like how to make boiled salt cod and potatoes. Of course, everyone knew how to make that. The roasts, small meats, forcemeat, sumac tea, black tea, chamomile tea, potatoes, biscuits and gravy, bacon, fried and scrambled eggs, French toast, various soups, game and fowl, a few vegetable dishes, various fresh fish, puddings, custards, fools, crumbles, pies and cookies were covered. I was able to specify temperatures rather than using the traditional keeping, warm, hot, or scorching temperature notations of the period cookbooks. I had clip-on oven thermometers added to the ovens. That was it. I'd had enough. I was taking a goddamn vacation. The place would roll on alone without me for a month or so. I bought everyone $500 gift checks for Christmas and called a travel agent out of Bangor at random. Hello, Shelley's International Travel. May I help you? Yes, please. I'd like to have a private plane take me to Montreal, have a limo pick me up, and take me to Le Petit. There I'd like a suite reserved for 3 weeks. During that time, I'd like the services of a car and driver with local knowledge of the city. I'll be attending concerts, visiting museums, shopping, and in general vacationing. I may be staying longer in the city, but I don't know at this time. I may wish to head south to the Texas coast for a while to soak up some heat and barbecue. Please inquire as to reservations and produce an itinerary as well as a charge sheet. You can get back to me on this number. If anything needs to be mailed, then the Shieldsport post office knows how to find me. I'm Harvey Paxton, and I'm one of 2 adult males on Shields Island. If they can't find me, then I'll have to take up issues with them. A long pause bent the air. You wouldn't be pulling a lady's leg, now would you? I replied, no, not in the least. I'm serious as a heart attack. I need a goddamn vacation, and I tagged you out of the phone book. Now, are you going to get busy, or do I call someone else? She hurriedly replied, no, that's quite all right. I get on this right away. I should have a preliminary itinerary and set of numbers for you by this time tomorrow. I'll call you to confirm and get billing information. Then I'll have the tickets couriered out to you. Is that satisfactory, sir? Yes. Thank you. Click. Damn. I didn't need a vacation. I had been pretty abrupt with her, hadn't I? Well, I'd be paying her enough in rake-off to make it worth the scratches I'd given her. I tried on my Goodwill suit. It didn't fit right. I'd buy another one once in Canada. I packed a pair of good black wool whipcord pants, a comfortable canvas shirt, a micro-fleece hoodie, and my goose-down jacket, the latter which I packed into its bag and put into my suitcase. I went online to buy a good leather suitcase, a nice covered suit hanger, a high-end carry-on pack. I found this thing called a leather airport escort. It held my tickets, passport, and driver's license on a lanyard around my neck. I bought one. I looked for it and found a nice, pile-lined black leather bomber jacket. It would look good and keep me warm as well. Levenger had a big bomber jacket leather briefcase that would hold a couple of files, my laptop, charger, and mouse. They'd all be delivered by FedEx next day air. I rolled up the suit carrier within the suitcase, added my standard hotel kit of underwear, socks, my own pillowcase, tea bags, sugar, bourbon, a clock, night light, an all-band radio, and a pack of batteries, as well as my DOP kit. I had my dad's old pigskin DOP kit that had more boiled neat's food oil in it than leather. In one corner of the suitcase, I had a super tightly packed little kit called a high-rise evacuation shroud. It was mostly a see-through plastic bag with elastic straps that fit under your armpits and had a smoke filter that you clenched in your teeth when it was deployed. I let Juliana and Mark know that I was burnt out and was doing my snapping turtle imitation, so it was time for a vacation. They had my cell number if the place was burning. Otherwise, call the lawyers. On second thought, call the lawyers, period. In my mood, I might just say, let the damned place burn. I got my contact folder, packed up my stuff, and asked Mark to drive me to the Big Bangor Airport's private terminal. There I hooked up with my ride, waved bye to Mark, and settled back for the hop to Montreal. There was no confusion about finding my luggage. Coming from the private flight line, I got taken care of by customs right away. He looked curiously at my rolled-up suit bag. I noted, it's been a few years and my Goodwill suit doesn't fit anymore. I'll have one made while I'm here on vacation. He said, may I ask why you selected a private plane? Sure. I replied. I held up my bottle of wild turkey. Those a-holes would have stolen my bourbon. Then I would have found it necessary to visit them where they lived. He nodded. That'd do it. He was about to stamp my passport when he noticed the survival shroud. He was about to take it apart when I stopped him. If you pull it apart, it'll never go back together. It's a survival device to get out of a high-rise. It covers your upper body to keep the smoke from your eyes, and there's a mouthpiece you bite to breathe through. It's a smoke filter. He carefully read the packaging, nodded, and put it back. Good idea. Where you headed? Le Petit. I've got a suite waiting. He was visibly impressed. He stamped my passport and shook my hand. Have a good trip. Thanks. I was about to chew my people's ears off. I really need this vacation. My limo driver was waiting with a placard bearing my name. He was 7 feet tall if he was an inch. He took my luggage from me and led me out to his rig. I asked, are you my guide for the 3 weeks? Yes, sir. I grew up in the city and know everywhere from the dive bars and grunge rock scene to the Japanese tea houses, 4-star restaurants, and everything in between. I replied, cool. First, I want to check in and get situated. Then I want a high-end tailor to get a good wool suit made. After that, I want steam and a massage. Then we eat. Where I eat, you eat. None of this sitting in the car and eating a Christly sandwich, understand? He nodded and grinned. I have the feeling that this is going to be a good gig. I replied, I don't believe in making enemies. Friends help. Neutrals ignore. Enemies obstruct. Call me Harvey. I got checked in and found my tickets for next Saturday night's concert waiting for me. I found Matt, my driver, waiting for me near the door. Where do we go for a top-end suit? He immediately replied, Harry Rosen. You'll need an appointment. I nodded and got out to talk to the nice man at the hotel counter. The concierge service of a good hotel is what you really paid for. I asked for a soonest appointment at Harry Rosen. I got a nod and a raised finger while he made a call. We had time for a snack, at which time they could fit me in at about 3:30. I nodded my thanks. I got back into the car, pulling it to behind me. We've got a 3:30 appointment with Harry Rosen et.al. How about we spend an hour getting around a little grub? He put the car in drive. Sandwiches? Sounds good. I replied. We ended up at, God help me, a place called Reuben's. I have to admit, they did have a pretty damned good Reuben sandwich. I had an iced tea to go with it. Matt had the same. Soon it was time to leave. I washed out my mouth, cleaned up, and it was off to the races. Matt drove up to a smart-looking building facade. I walked in while he found a place to park. A well-dressed young man asked if I had an appointment. I replied, Paxton, 3:30. He nodded and walked me back to a small, well-appointed room with a table and 2 chairs. He offered me a seat and my choice of beverage. I was very happy to order ice water with a twist of peel. I removed my coat, hung it over the back of my chair, and sat calmly, waiting. At 3:30 on the dot, an older man briskly came in, shook my hand as I rose, and asked what they could do for me. I began by telling him what I didn't know. I don't know if I require the services of a bespoke tailor or not. I am not a Nobel laureate, a diplomat, nor do I deal with the ennobled. I'm wealthy enough to make creases sit back, but keep it on a leash to let it make more money for me. My day-to-day suit, would you believe, is an 1850s sack suit with a linen shirt and a ribbon tie. I am the proprietor and owner of Shields Island, just off the coast of Maine, where I am furiously building a historical settlement, a semi-working farm estate village. I came to you because my one good black suit no longer fits. I would like several suits with vests. 1 in heavy black wool with a good lining, 2 in summer-weight gray wool, and 1 cream-colored linen suit, as well as a gentleman's head covering and a walking stick, metal cord. If it can be done, I would also like 4 pair of woolen whipcord pants in a boot cut. Dark green, I believe. He sat back in his chair, smiling. That's quite a nice order for us. Let's take a look at a few examples to see what you're comfortable with. As we rose, I continued. I do not like pocket flaps or button-down rear pockets. I use pockets, I don't look at them. Any garments that I purchase should have exceptionally durable pockets put into them, aftermarket if necessary. All right, he replied. Fine, there's no problem with that. So, it sounds like a European, loose-cut suit is what you're after. Let's look through these. I spent about a half hour running back and forth between 3 binders of pictures, each holding some 50 picture of slightly portly men wearing suits. I remarked, I take no insult in the fact that you've matched my body form quite nicely. In fact, it's a good tool to see what I'd look like in them. I had slipped pieces of paper in them at 3 points. Here, these appeal to me, yet I have no idea what I'd look like in them. I suppose it's like those personality tests where you're at odds to say what you are like versus what you would wish to be like. He nodded. Very good. I have a newer tool to aid you in that decision. Please follow me. He took me into a room with a computer and a computerized camera. Please sit here. Lower your jaw a trifle. Scowl a bit. Hold still. Flash. Turn a bit left and do it again. Flash. And now a bit right. Flash there. That ought to do it. Now the computer puts your head on in place of the models. He typed a bit, no doubt selecting the suits which I'd pointed out. In a moment or two, he showed me the results on the screen, one after the other. The third, I think. Yes, that will do nicely. Oh, and I'd like to add something to the order. Something like a good raincoat with a liner, such as London fog used to have the reputation for. I'm certain you know what I'm after. Right. We've done the hard part. Now let's get you into the hands of a tailor to get you measured up properly. We'll work up a suit and have it ready by, 5 working days, all right with you? I smiled at him. I'm in town for at least 2 and probably 3 weeks. Then I'm flying down to Toronto to see the sights. From there I'll probably head for Houston, Texas to see the sights and take in the regional specialties. I'm a great believer that perfect barbecue exists somewhere and it's my destiny to find it. Good man. It's a wise man that knows what he wants in life and enjoys what that is. If that's your avocation, would you like to purchase a couple of sauce-proof leather vests to wear while on your quest? I grinned and shook his hand. Certainly. Add them to the bill. Also include a half-dozen good, hard-wearing long-sleeved Egyptian cotton shirts for me, cream-colored. Speaking of, I do believe that I need to clear your accounting department. Please slip them one of these. I gave him a business card noting my accounting firm's phone number and my account number with them. If the accountant needs to confirm the purchases, they know how to contact me. Or I have the wrong accounting firm. The measuring went as expected. I got out of there by 5:15, which I thought was phenomenal. I found Matt waiting, reading a book. I rapped on the roof. He unlocked the door, and we were off. I considered what I was hungry for. Matt, is there any place around here known for their lobster or crab legs? He shrugged and said, "Price no object. And we should get your concierge on our side for a reservation. But the best place I know of in town for steak or seafood is La Queue de Cheval. It's a bit pretentious, but you don't need a dinner jacket to eat there." Cool. I called the hotel front desk, identified myself, and asked for the concierge. I then requested a standing 6 o'clock reservation for 2 for the next week, beginning tonight. The concierge waved his magic glove and got us in. I thanked the man and hung up. I turned to Matt. "We've got a standing reservation for the place for 6 o'clock throughout the next week. Damn, am I going to eat good?" "Yep, that's the way this works. I eat good, you eat good. I get poisoned, you get poisoned. I don't like sushi, I like gaucho beef. I like blackened tuna and salmon. I like good pizza. I usually turn in around 9 or 10, leaving your nights free. This Saturday, I'd like to find some good jazz, but I'm an early riser, so I turn into a pumpkin at midnight. If you like to run, I'll be in the hotel gym by 5:30 and there until about 6:30, when I'll shower, change, and find breakfast. If the breakfast bar at the hotel is any good, I'll be there. If it's shit, I'll rely on you for someplace the truck drivers eat." "Okay, very okay." We walked into the place, me in my bomber jacket and Matt in his antique M65 field jacket, both of us in jeans and lace-up boots. Nobody blinked an eye. We had a drink, looked over the menu, and made our choices. Matt was a prime rib guy. I joined him with a queen portion of prime rib and a lobster tail with drawn butter. This was old-style steakhouse fare. You're confronted with trays of meat from which to make your selection. I slipped the waiter 100 for good meat and good service. It was good meat, well-cooked, and with well-prepared sides. It was pricey, but you get what you pay for. I'm a devotee of 2 buck chuck, so along those lines I picked an Australian Cryas. I'm sure I left the wine steward lying on the floor and clutching his chest. I'm not a big believer in desserts, so I sat back with my coffee and cream while I watched Matt devour half an apple pie. That boy was a stomach on legs. As we left, I gave him the eye and said we can do better than that. I resolved to do a little research on Yelp, the people's answer to advertising. I headed for my temporary home to do a little research as to where to go next. The Science Museum wasn't far from the hotel. I wanted to spend some time there. I also wanted to find a dojo to see how my residual skills were doing. About 8 that night, I'd settled on Moishi's Steakhouse for tomorrow's dinner. I asked the house expert to get me a couple of reservations for somewhere between 6 and 8, or even 9 o'clock. I found a martial arts supply store where I planned to pick up a pair of single sticks. I called Matt on his cell phone to ask him if he would please bring some very fine steel wool with him in the morning. I need to treat the single sticks before use. Nothing else struck me as important or necessary, so I went to sleep with a drink in my hand, watching an old movie. I rose, stretched, and tied on a waist pack with my wallet, room key, and a pocket knife in it. Then I headed down for the gym. I ran my butt off. Then I did my push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups. They had no bag to punch against. Pity about that. A clod came on the elevator with me and tried to muscle me into the corner and grabbed for my wallet. He really shouldn't have tried that. I was already in the mood to kick, but at a dojo, I used his weight against him. His choice of venue worked against him, as there was no way to get away from me in the closed elevator. Palm strikes work wonderfully if you can brace your rear foot against something. He'd have to have his jaw wired shut and his shoulders put back in place. His collarbones were in pieces, as were his shin bones. His knees I left alone. I really bounced him off the walls and floor. I found myself smiling as I showered and dressed. As I was making my way to the door to meet with Matt, a man approached me. He flashed a card at me, then hid it away again and reached for my arm. I yelled out, "Assault. Call the police." Then I dropped him with a fast, hard forearm strike. The concierge approached me. "Sir, that was the police." Well, if he'd acted a bit more civilized, then he wouldn't be on the floor, now would he? "I suggest you secure the lobby tape and make a few copies. Also lock up the security tape from the elevator where I was assaulted. I may wish to press charges. I'll want copies of both tapes from my lawyer." I was going with the old homily that the best defense is a good offense. If I could rock them back with a few good attacks, then perhaps they'd think again about prosecuting me. The tapes would go a long ways towards establishing who the attacking parties were. Matt and I left for a little restaurant he knew with good food and large portions. Imagine that. After an excellent breakfast, I directed him to the martial arts supply house, where I secured a GI, belt, and 2 single sticks. Matt knew of a laundromat that took in work. I handed over the GI and belt with instructions to wash them both 8 times in hot water with bleach, for pickup at the same time the next day. Wearing a new GI is a punishment. They have to be softened up a bit. I spent an hour with the steel wool and the sticks sitting on a street-side bench, getting rid of the shellac. Soon they gripped the skin much better. I didn't have the time to do a proper wrapping job, but this would suffice. Matt took me to a big fishing outlet where I bought several spools of black 200-pound test braided line that I used to wrap the grips. I used one club to pound in the wrapping on the other, then use a light wash of hide glue to secure them in place if it were available. We spent the day at the Science Museum. He was surprised when I directed him to Moishi's Steakhouse. I supposed that he'd never been exposed to Jewish restaurant culture. I wondered if Greek restaurants ever made it this far north. They'd cook anything. What they didn't know, they'd fake. We got the hairy eyeball upon entering in street clothes. However, when I mentioned that my suits were on order at Harry Rosen's, it was all smiles. After $100 bill graced the maitre d's palm, things went swimmingly. I found the food to be of a much higher class than that of the night before. Matt seemed impressed. This is old 30s, 40s, and 50s Jewish culture. We're goyim, but accepted because we know the rules of the game. You keep your head down, compliment the food, and eat what's put in front of you. You won't be disappointed, I promise you. You come back on your own later, they'll remember you. If you come in with a girl on your arm, you'll damned near be adopted. Mark my words. However, never, ever try to get in here on a Saturday night. That's their Sunday. Depending on the group, it could break all agreements. Don't try it. There really was a Jewish mafia, and its legacy could live on here. After dinner, we broke up early. I spent the next 6 hours diamond wrapping the grips of the single sticks. I didn't have access to fish glue or hide glue, so I picked up a tiny bottle of a urethane product called Gorilla Glue and gave the wraps an exceptionally light brushing and immediately wiped it off. I'd have to pay for that hand towel as it was ruined. Come morning, I worked out, had a light breakfast, secured and paid for my GI, then had Matt drive me to the dojo I'd found in the phone book that mentioned Kung Fu being taught there. I walked in with my GI and sticks in a long gym bag. I asked to find out if anyone was around that, for a fee of course, would help check me out on my skills. A younger guy gave me a sure, no problem, so I paid up and headed back to the gym where I changed. As I came out, I noticed a small crowd of younger guys sitting against the wall, watching and commenting. I supposed that I was the Daily Show. It must have been a slow news day. I stretched and did a few forms, stretched again, and watched my breathing. He came up beside me and used a single stick to smack me in the elbow. I took a step back while I shook the feeling back into my arm. He was grinning, no, smirking. I said, low and slow, you have broken the protocol of the dojo. Perhaps I have a lesson for you. That protocol is in place to keep fools like you from getting killed by combat veterans like me. I went into my attack forms while he wildly attempted to backpedal and defend himself. He never once gained his center or achieved a proper stance. I broke both his collarbones, his upper arms, and several of his ribs before I halted. You could have heard a pin drop. I went back to the dressing room to change. An older guy was standing there when I came back out. I said to him, I take my leave of this house of ill repute, and left. I think that once the air cleared, it would be the last time that the kid was left alone in the dojo, and I'd bet good money that his buddies had seen their last time inside those doors. At any rate, I was satisfied that my skills were at least still present, ill-tested though that last circus act had left them. I wondered that I hadn't heard from the police. We went shopping for books and movies. I picked up a few things that I wanted to read, and a few DVDs to fill out my collection. The next day, I paid a visit to a place that had martial arts and gymnasium on its signboard. Regrettably, nobody there was proficient in single stick or Florentine sticks. I rented some time to use their heavy bag with my sticks. I worked on my speed, strength, and striking patterns for over an hour, by which time I was copiously sweating and really needed that cold shower. That's what I had been missing, the heavy bag work. I reserved an hour once a day for the next 4 days. I began to get my rhythms back and the snap in my strikes. I tried to do the proselytizing thing and get Matt interested, but he didn't bite. I still think his reach combined with a bow stick would have been devastating. I visited museums, including one of the best stamp collections in the world, tucked away in the basement of a black brick building on a tree-lined street. I spent a day there. I wandered through a mall, people watching. The last time I'd been there, I'd been a high school student and couldn't even order a hot dog with mustard. This time I could. I got the beer too. That night, I dragged Matt out to Maison du Jazz to see what was hanging. It wasn't too bad. There were no Dizzy Gillespies on that stage, but it was a good time. The next day was a smash and grab on the city bookstores. I had a project in mind. I didn't want to press my luck with Harry Rosen, as deerskin tailoring has an art of its own. I backtrailed through several links to find someone that could make me a pair of deerskin broadfall knee breeches and a pair of leather leggings, both a bit oversized. I had the breeches made with adjustable suspenders. I had them treble dyed with walnut hulls and oak gall ink. Another fellow promised to make me a pair of pucker toe mocks with sewn-in heavy boiled leather soles, likewise dyed a dark color. Another fellow was willing to make me a long, hair-off buffalo skin waistcoat, dyed to reasonably match the breeches, seeing as how he was going into the project blind and had no contact with the other vendor. They'd all be waiting for me when I returned. I was simply waiting for my suits to be ready. Matt seemed sad as he could see it in me. I'd had enough of this city. I spent some time in a hot tub, then called an escort service for a professional massage, no sex involved. I think that I surprised them at the no sex involved part. I got my massage, paid the lady $700 for the good job she'd done, and poured myself into bed. I set about finding a running track and heavy bag that I could use in Toronto. I paid for my reservations. I scheduled a private plane to take me to Toronto and a limo to pick me up. I scheduled a suite for 4 days at the Hotel La Germaine with an option to extend. I also booked a reservation at the Tom Jones Steakhouse for Sunday night at 8. I went to Harry Rosen for a final fitting, picked up my clothes, and said my goodbyes. The walking stick which they provided was 3.5 feet long. It was made of a 3/8-inch thick steel rod with ferrules at the top and bottom, confining many leather rings jammed tightly together, which stiffened the thing. I found it quite nice. I paid Matt an extra $700 on top of his contract and $500 for the concierge at Le Petit. Matt drove me to the airport, and we shook hands. I took off for my next port of call. I settled into my new hotel room. I noted that the hotel restaurant didn't open until 5 p.m., so I asked the concierge where one might have a decent breakfast close to the hotel. He remarked, "Why would a person wish such a thing?" I replied that it was the duty of a concierge to perform up to the expectations of the customer, not comment as to their feeding habits, desires, or sexual predilections. I remarked that he had just exceeded the bounds of decency, and would he please arrange to change my reservations to the Holiday Inn where at least a man could get a decent breakfast without it being bandied about by fools and regulars. The scarlet tone of his face let me know that he realized that he'd been chastised. I called ahead to the Holiday Inn to verify my reservations. The fool had screwed it up out of sheer meanness. I made certain to let the manager know that his concierge was losing him reservations and goodwill. The man was a rotten egg. When I checked out, I left the concierge 2 copper pennies. I resolved to have a good time no matter how much I wished to pound him into beef tartar. I exceeded my time on the heavy bag. I apologized and left a higher deposit for my time. I spent some quality time at the library. I tended to take long walks with my single sticks holstered across my back. In the mornings I sat in the park and watched the veterans do Tai Chi. They invited me to join them, but I had to refuse. I'd be a distraction. I was still too angry. After I watched them, I went to the gym and beat the stuffing out of a heavy bag, first with my hands, feet, knees, and forearms, then with the single sticks. I was up to 2.5 hours a day working the bag. I paid them for a new one as I'd pretty well beat the hell out of their old one. I suggested that they not hang the new bag until I left, in about a week's time. I visited the docks during the evenings, which had been gentrified. Some of the old warehouses had been subdivided and converted into performance halls. I relaxed there, watching several groups do their best. Occasionally a professional would sit in, raising the entertainment level a notch or two. The crowd certainly appreciated it, and the energy levels were appreciably higher. I found a few places with good onion rings and pizza that evening. I found Toronto to be a lively town. It had better steak houses than Montreal. That was for certain. It also had a large Chinatown which I explored with great delight. I satisfied my longing for spicy Chinese dishes and finally tried Peking duck. I realized that I had to give the right impression to gain access to the better shops. First, I bought a slimline, highly polished briefcase in which I placed a checkbook, a few business cards in a case, and a good pen. I hired a Bentley and chauffeur to squire me about. I dressed in my good black wool suit, hat, and overcoat. I took up my cane and went searching out certain works in jade and jadeite, such as bowls and cups, works which would deceive the eye with their lines and colors. After making a couple purchases and exchanging business cards, I found myself introduced to another group of impeccably dressed gentlemen wearing suits that shouted out of being from bespoke tailors. They were meticulously polite to one another. I saw no tattoos, yet had my suspicions. I explained my desire to build a private viewing room with examples of beautiful jade and jadeite bowls that captured one's eye and transported one to a different place. I received a few small smiles. We took tea together. 3 gentlemen exchanged business cards with me, with all due ceremony. I carried on with my daily routines. In 2 days, I contacted offices of the first gentleman to leave me a card. An appointment was made for a viewing. I dressed as before and was driven to an upscale district near the airport. I was shown past several rooms that, by their velvet-covered trays, I assumed to be gemstone viewing rooms. Upstairs, I was confronted by a gallery of display stands, each with a small spotlight illuminating the display. 2 slender gentlemen stood careful watch near the door, and another accompanied me, carefully watching my hands. There were no cases and no signs. I spotted 2 beautiful works, one in yellow jade and another in white jade I saw, but one green jade bowl I liked, and it only showed its true glory when lit from below. I indicated my choices, then asked, "I know it may not be your forte, but do you have any hand-thrown tea bowls?" I once held a small bowl that, while hideous in appearance, made me smile when my eyes were closed. He looked at me as if to reevaluate my taste. He nodded and led me to another small room. There were half a dozen slightly misshapen bowls on display. I picked up each one in succession without looking at them. One had a hidden edge to beware of. One had a second lip which held your finger. One mottled gray bowl with a ridge molded into the side kept drawing me back. It was slightly larger than the others and had an irregular glaze. It fit my hand and just felt comfortable. I indicated that I wished to purchase that one. I was led to a small, neat office where I was presented a small sheet of good paper with a figure written on it. I smiled, opened my briefcase, withdrew my checkbook and pen, wrote out a check for the price listed, then folded the sheet of paper over my check and slid it across the desk to my salesman. He picked it up, checked the value, smiled and shook my hand. Your purchases are being boxed as we speak. Where do you wish them delivered? To Shields Island, Maine, please. I trust your shipping arrangements more than my own. It would be a tragedy to lose them at this point. He nodded and walked me out. We drove back to Chinatown where I entered a second-floor eating establishment and had a nice dish of pickle and a truly excellent pork chow fun, or noodle dish, with tea. I returned to the hotel where I dismissed the driver for the day. I researched where I might obtain Franklin whale oil lamps. A Franklin lamp is an oil lamp bearing 2 wicks. When both are lit, the flame spans between them and gives more light than expected. I also made inroads as to finding candlesticks, a reproduction traveling desk, and some early American collapsible camp furniture, sometimes known as campaign furniture. I knew where to find an Aladdin lamp that I could suspend by a cord or rope. I also had a line on cabin tents, or wall tents. I already had a cot in storage. I also needed a trader's wedge tent for registering the guests at the rendezvous. Services would have to be arranged for daily ice and firewood deliveries, portisans, and a dumpster. I already had the water line run. A wooden deck had to be placed about it to keep a mud pit from forming. A firewood bunker needed to be installed. I took some photographs of the campsite and the parking field the previous year. I needed to get a web page online with the photos, map, days the camp was to be open, as well as the camp rules and fees. I planned on a 3-week camp priced at $5 per week. The final advertisements had to go out incorporating the website address, as well as a circular to be paid for under the cover of Smoke and Fire magazine. I also contacted Crazy Crow Company to get my VU on their webpage. I wished to arrange for local cooks to provide a Saturday night feast for the crowd. I had no idea how many to plan for. It could be 5 or 50. We'd have to play it by ear and be ready to call for more services and food. A covered concrete floored shelter would be put in between the kitchen and the campground as soon as the ground firmed up. It would be supplied with electricity and a fireplace. I planned to have it enclosed eventually with wooden shutters and doors. We could use it as a warming shed in the winter if we installed a dogleg passageway at the entrance to block the wind. The local Boy Scouts would be encouraged to use it as a winter campsite. Deep bench seats against the walls could double as bunks. I'd set up the teepee for the kids and a wall tent for myself. If Juliana wished to participate, she would be welcome. I'd have to get her dress made soonest. As a diversion, I found a granite quarry still in operation not far from Bangor. I commissioned 39 huge granite beams to be delivered, each 2 feet by 2 feet by 8 feet long, to build the spring house. Some of the beams were to be cut into thirds so as to not overlap the joints. The ground where the spring surfaced was to be dug out, and a special stone was to be cut for its floor. A ledge was reserved to walk on around the edge of the pool, and pegs were driven into the walls so that cords could be tied off to raise up the submerged buckets. This would be built during the rendezvous. Yes, we would cheat and hire a crane to get it built. I did not wish to hire 40 men to do the job 1 crane operator and 2 helpers could do. I made an appointment to call on the second gentleman to give me his card. This time I was dropped off at a large bank in Chinatown and directed to the 4th floor. I saw evidence of a busy trading house. I was taken into the back of the establishment where a short hall was set aside to exhibit an array of unusual jade cups and bowls. I found a beautiful little bowl featuring some inclusions and a nice bicolor jade bowl that looked marvelous while illuminated from below. I was explicitly shown a set of 4 dark green jade cups on a cream-colored jade tray. When lit from below, it almost glowed. I was hooked. I made my purchases and arranged for shipment back to the island. It was nearly the 1st of March. I only had a month to go before I wished to be back on the island to take receipt of Clara's cheesecake. In 2 days, I called the number listed on the 3rd business card. I was picked up by his driver and delivered to another Chinatown bank, where I was walked to a vault door by an attendant. 2 gentlemen opened the door and ushered me through. The vault was a display. Japanese, Chinese, and Korean artifacts were on display. I still had a couple million in the year's liquid account, so I wasn't as worried as I could have been about the expense. I saw terracotta warriors, temple food dogs, and imperial ginger jars. I found one exhibit that truly gripped me. It was a mottled brown jade bowl that, when illuminated, gave the ceiling above it the illusion of a cloudy day. I paid for the bowl, its packing and delivery. I inquired about their taking on a commission. I had once seen a tall brass statue of the Buddha some 16 to 18 feet tall at the Davenport Museum in Iowa. I would like to have a smaller, say, 4-foot-tall copy of that statue or one similar to it, in the same finish, gold-highlighted bronze. He accepted the commission for his employer, and I departed. I was delivered back to my hotel, whereupon I hired a private plane to take me to Houston. I also booked a suite at the Houstonian for a week. My trip was to be capped off by a ticket to a Cirque du Soleil performance in Austin. I had my dark suit taken to be dry cleaned while I exercised in the gym and ran about the neighborhood. Not much was said about the older, intense-looking fellow hammering down the lakefront with 2 white sticks strapped to his back. Just before re-entering the hotel, I noticed a large tree with a big red X painted on the bark. I inquired at the desk, "Is that tree to be cut down?" "Yes, sir, it is." "Then you wouldn't mind my treating it as if it were a heavy bag, would you?" "No, sir, have at it." "Thank you." I stripped down to sweatpants and carried my single sticks out with me. I started with kicks and punches, proceeding to knee and elbow strikes. Finally, I picked up my sticks and started in. Chips of bark flew until there was no more bark in my target zone. I kept it up for another hour, until I'd had a good workout. The surface of the tree was rough and splintered when I took the elevator to my room. I needed a shower. I had been considering having a couple steel beaks cast and pinned in place on my single sticks. I changed my mind and decided to wrap the last inch on each in steel wire instead. The next morning I packed, dressed in my newly cleaned suit, paid, and left for the airport. Upon landing, I witnessed the normal idiocies occurred during customs, but I kept my patience. I kept my mouth shut and watched him closely. I believe that I soon had him nervous enough to stamp my passport and allow me through, just to get rid of me. A taxi driver agreed to deliver me to the Houstonian, so I loaded everything up, and off we flew through downtown Houston traffic. I felt as if I were in Bombay or Bangkok the way that man drove. I spent the rest of the day relaxing. I dressed for the pool and lay out to relax in the warmth and sunshine. There wasn't much sun, but it was warm enough. Soon I took advantage of the spa. Since it was midweek, it was almost empty. I received a thorough massage and wobbled my way up to the room for a nap. Dinner in Dallas seemed to imply some sort of beef dish by default. I had a small prime rib au jus with a couple of steakhouse sides. I have to admit it was pretty far up there in quality points. I'd have to try a bone-in strip steak and the onion rings to see where they landed on my quest list. I hired a car and driver, as well as a female escort that grew up around there to guide me to the best barbecue places around. We got a bit frisky, but didn't let it interfere with our search for the best barbecue in Southeast Texas. We also hit the Galleria a few times, and I had the chance to run through the Houston Arboretum. I had a chance to work with a few pit masters that showed me the ins and outs to hot smoked and cold smoked meats and sweet smoke versus bitter smoke. I tasted a lot of samples of what I consider to be labors of love. When I left town for Maine, I had a new appreciation for smoked brisket. My pipes were well exercised and clean, and, hopefully, I left a young lady smiling from an endorphin overload and a nice bonus to her bank balance. I would definitely try to catch another performance of the Cirque du Soleil. I appeared back at the house the day before my birthday. I took the rest of the day to unpack, unwind, and unbox my purchases. I immediately called a carpenter to install a set of pillars of varying heights topped with bottom-illuminated box frame shelves in flat black to show off my purchases. That tea bowl got pride of place on a beautiful walnut pedestal with 3 small spotlights on it. There was a couple of $1 million in jade in that room. Yes, I kept the door locked. The next day I did the birthday thing and got laid back again. The day after that I dug up the gardens at either side of the front of the house. I placed landscaping timbers, then mixed in compost and sand to make raised beds. The right side got roses. The left side got my herb garden that I'd been trying to get planted for 4 years. I set about getting the website in place. Once it was finished, the advertising went out. I set up the contracts for ice, firewood, outhouses, portisans. Little blue rooms, and a dumpster. I also set a date to receive the granite for the spring house and booked the crane and crew to do the job. The rendezvous was scheduled to run from the 1st of October until the ground froze too deep for the water to flow to the campsite. Then we'd backflow the pipe with hot water from a cleaned-out pressure washer and leave the water delivery pipe dry for the winter. I suppose that if they wanted to stay longer, they could dip water out of the spring-fed creek, but it was up to them. I wouldn't kick them out until the 31st. We planned on a locally catered free dinner the first Saturday evening. If it worked out, I planned on doing it twice a year, throughout the months of June and October, which would give the grass time to recover. We wouldn't take site reservations, but we would take festival seating reservations for the first 50 campsites. I reserved a row of sites with available electricity that were relatively near the dumpster for vendors, primarily food vendors. If anyone was caught tying things to the orchard trees or cutting standing timber, I vowed to show them my new backhoe and make noises referring to the fertilizer demands of new orchard stock. I planned on an Adopt a Scout and an Adopt a High School Kid program during the VU to promote buckskinning skills. I was doing the same thing with Kim and Jim, so why not? The farmhouse, the field hands bunkhouse, and the field hands bathhouse were going up. The big picnic shelter with a fireplace and waist-high walls went in near the rendezvous site. Soon we would break ground for the wood shop, cooperage, and the stable. I had yet to talk the Northerners' Friends of Shields Island at the north end of the island. Into a couple picnic shelters near the big farmhouse to give the tourists some place to sit down and ease their legs. We received our piglets just before I arrived back on the site. We fed them cooked grain mash. If we'd had any dairy operation going, the slop from that would go into their feed trough as well. The garden got fertilized from the compost heap, turned over and planted. I joined Mark in the dawn and dusk critter patrol. The kids were doing pretty well in their classroom skills. It was about time to take them in to be tested for their end-of-year evaluations. They weren't worried, so why should I be? I took a trip into Bangor to sign off on the income tax returns. I invited Mr. Bolt out for a dinner and drink to see what I spent all that money on. He seemed intrigued and accepted. I gave Juliana fair warning. She cooked the sides and I cooked the steaks. Mark and Clara were invited as well. The carpenter had finished the displays the week before. The bottoms of the trays were lined in illuminated opal glass. I experimented with black masks to get the best effect for each display. When I turned on the dimmest lighting the room could provide, then hit the illumination for the new displays, the effect was quite dramatic. When I showed the group what I'd purchased, they were dumbfounded. Mr. Bold exclaimed, "I'd say you got well over your money's worth. These are National Museum caliber. We'd best see towards their appraisal and insurance lest something tragic occur." Mark asked about the ugly little bowl under the spotlights. I sat him down at the desk. "Close your eyes, Mark. Now take this and turn it in your hands. You'll find the right spot." I'd never seen such a gentle look on his face before. He got it. He opened his eyes and struggled to hand it back to me. "Now you know what tactile art can be like. That's a tea bowl. I paid $250,000 for it, and consider that a steal." Mr. Bolt showed interest, so Harvey tried the experiment with him as well. He seemed to undergo an epiphany. It didn't strike Juliana, Clara, Kim, or Tim as hard, but they certainly felt it. The men with large hands seemed to gain the most from it. I set up the kids' 18 teepee along with my wall tent at the end of the campground furthest from the gate. I taught them what the liner and what the ozan did for them. I set up a knife range and a hawk range. I sent away for ATL spears for the three of us and throwers for the kids. Our range was on a white sand beach, so we couldn't lose the shafts. Like hell. It was just harder to do. I got them painter's pants, mocks, waistcoats, and long hunter's shirts. I taught them how to hot dye the pants in the soap-making kettle. Soon they were building their campfires from scratch and sleeping comfortably in the teepee. I taught him how to use a cat hole and, even better in a long-term camp, how to set up a deep pit and a leaning pole. A little lime keeps the smell unnoticeable. Being bored kids in the summertime, they were soon holding their own impromptu knife and hawk throwing contests. They became comfortable with a little hasty pudding for breakfast or a small fitch of grilled bacon wrapped in bread. They learned how good a little roast beef hash mixed with a baked potato can be for dinner. I taught them to take squirrels, clean them, check them for parasites, and grill them over the fire. I bought them belts and trade knives, then showed them how to care for the knives. They sure didn't have much trouble skinning those squirrels. They learned how to cope with rainy, blustery days in the woods. I showed them the difference a poncho makes with a rope around your waist, and what a difference a couple hot rocks make at the foot of your bed. We went through several books on survival foraging and identified what was out there that was good to eat. I planted some little bulb onions and wild garlic. They thought that they'd found wild potatoes. I didn't disabuse them of their beliefs. I planted several root crops, including carrots and turnips near a couple of the old farmhouses. I know, I cheated, but it made the game a lot more fun. I got a big steel pan. We set it up over a little hearth and fed it sea water until we made our own salt. I showed them a picture of an Indian willow backrest that I'd owned once. The guy that made it for me went way the hell overboard and made it 4 feet wide by over 6 feet long. I couldn't carry the thing. Actually, it was designed to be a big man's sprung bed. I showed the kids pictures from the internet of a Blackfoot and a Cherokee backrest. They took the ball and ran. I didn't see them for a couple of weeks. When they came back, they had 2 very nice backrests completed. I didn't have the heart to ask them which side of the fence all the suckers came from. I ordered some blue blanket cloth from Crazy Crow to stitch over the ends of the sticks. I cheated and bought 3 to 8 inch flat bamboo sticks to make my own. It rolled into a tighter bundle. It took 2 bath mats at $12.50 per mat at Bed, Bath & Beyond. A backrest keeps your butt and legs off of the damp or frozen soil, keeping you warmer and much more comfortable. You can lean back comfortably. An A-frame propping up the back gives you something to lean against and relax, inside or outside the teepee. I had bought them bearskins to act like oversized hairy sleeping bags. We believe that the Plains Indians, when they had the robes from bear or buffalo, slept on one and under another to stay warm, with all in the lodge sharing the furs and the warmth. The kids were coming along but had a ways to go. I didn't try to really push them, but made sure that they'd feel comfortable in a rendezvous setting. In a totally different area, I made sure that the county building inspectors were in on the farmhouse construction plans. They could doom the whole thing if they got their noses out of joint. It was July and time to start harvesting. We had a few new things this year, like okra and hot peppers. I dragooned the kids into helping me prep the jars in exchange for some supervised time on the rifle range. We didn't open up the rendezvous to firearms as black powder weapons were noisy and scared the crap out of the birds. Since the north end of the island was a designated bird sanctuary, I didn't want to press our luck. However, a little .22 rifle doesn't get much of a rise out of the wildlife. I know. I watched. Like all kids, they like to plink and kill paper targets. We boiled out the jars, bought new lids, and sanitized them as well. We spent some quality time sharpening our knives and bleaching the plastic cutting surfaces, then started in on the fresh tomatoes. The first of the harvest, of course, went to the table. The lettuce, spring onions, tomatoes, cucumbers, and radishes graced our table and made a wonderful change from the grocery store crap that had been sitting around in temperature-controlled warehouses for a month or more. Fresh picked sure beats pre-picked for commercial markets. Tomatoes, despite all the marketing to the contrary, have a wonderful flavor that disappears as soon as the fruit hits refrigeration. There's an aroma there that's closely associated with the vine. It isn't hard to make a good salad dressing that puts most commercial versions to shame. Most cream dressings are primarily buttermilk. With a blender and a few ingredients, you're golden. Mark seemed to be just going through the motions. He needed a pick-me-up. I brought up the idea of a partner for him. A female partner. He looked terrified at first, as if, horror of horrors, I were trying to get him married. I told him that it may eventually turn into that, but the familiarization process had to get them into the same church, much less up to the altar together. I helped Mark word the announcement. We left it fairly open, wanting a widow or daughter that grew up on a farm, from 20 to 40 years old, willing to help with maintenance tasks around a reenactment village and help with a medium-sized farm garden. The broadsheet emphasized the separate bedroom, generous payroll, free room, board and insurance, and the use of a farm expense account for food and all automotive costs, including gasoline. I had 20 printed up. We posted them in church foyers, on grocery store billboards, and in local diners. I even put one up at the feed store. The harvest went on as usual. We dropped off the older jars of preserved food to the local churches and pantries to make room for the new crop. Soon the frosts came, and it settled down to a dull roar. We harvested the rest of the root vegetables and turned over the garden for the winter. Once the hard freeze hit, the pigs went to the butcher. Once we transferred enough meat to fill one chest freezer, the remaining beef went to the food pantry and churches to make room for the pork. I asked the butcher to return the ribs and bellies in NSF tanks, think white plastic dish tubs, so that I could cure and smoke them myself. I also did that with 2 big hams which I dry cured. Once the side meat was well smoked, I thick sliced it on our commercial slicer and wrapped the bacon in 1-pound fitches. It would keep nicely in a cold room. I gave Mark 10 pounds to put away in his coat room, up on a shelf. The smoked ribs got barbecued, and we had a fall feast. Meanwhile, I got the Woodwright shop, the stable, and the cooper's shop finished. A skilled man could have sat right down and gotten right to work at any of them. Against my better judgment, I bought a pair of young mules and a pair of riding horses. I bought a buckboard wagon and a sprung carriage with all the traces and harness to do the job around Christmas. I bought a half-ton of bagged grain and 100 pounds of wrinkled apples, for use as treats for the mules and the horses. I bought body blankets for them and made sure that the heaters and watering systems worked well. I read that the blankets should only be on them when we turned them out into the pasture on cold and windy days. A hand placed beneath the blanket should not come back sweaty. We didn't have assigned stalls for them, just a manger area that we could scrape down with the end loader every other day. I bought several tons of baled alfalfa for the barn and a couple tons of rough-chopped corn cobs for bedding. The kids and I spent part of each day working with the animals, grooming them, and caring for them. They soon became habituated to the place. I was worried about what might go wrong when we introduced them to the dogs, but it went very well. You could have sold tickets and popcorn to watch us try to harness the mules the first couple of times. I swear that they looked at me like I was some kind of idiot and sighed each time I got it wrong. Finally, I used several old pictures and an illustration from a harness maker's catalog to figure out what to do. The harness comes in two sections. There's a belly and chest band system or collar that secures to the animal and lets it pull without choking itself. Then that fastens to the shafts. This allows the horse or mule free movement, yet it can pull a wagon or buggy without distress. I made sure to have a vet come by every few months to check out our stock. We had a farrier come by to inspect the hooves and shoes of the horses and mules every season. I was hesitant to try riding the mules, but they seemed to watch whatever I was doing when I was on horseback. Finally, I took a deep breath and saddled one. So far, so good. I lay across the saddle, ready to jump up and run. He just turned his head to look at me. Finally, I got up in the stirrups and took a seat. He took a few minutes to understand what the reins meant. I had Mark lead his head AI guided with the reins, and that was all it took. Considering what it could have involved, I realized that I got off easy. We made much of them. They were quite pampered beasts, all in all. We had fresh eggs daily and stewing chicken when the hens got older. The yield from our garden along with plenty of beef and pork made up the bulk of our diets. We grew everything we needed except rice, wheat, cornmeal, beans, sugar, salt, spices, and dairy. We weren't raising our own cotton, flax, or wool, so we weren't self-sufficient in cloth either, but if worse came to worse, we could make our own shoes. We didn't raise enough fodder for the animals we had, nor the grain they needed, but the costs of that type of farming scaled against our success. Large operations were cheaper by the ton. We were much better off buying what we needed. The sawmill was pushing the scale of industry that we'd be able to support. Realistically, once we'd stopped building, it would have been packed up and sold to another group to build out their project. Actually, that was good, as huge areas wouldn't be denuded of trees if the sawmill moved around. We couldn't support a grain mill either in grain to grind or in power to operate it. I fully supported our decision not to get into dairy. We didn't pump our own oil or refine it either. We didn't dig the or manufacture our own iron and steel. We did not generate our own electricity. There were some places a wise man feared to tread for a reason. Let's attempt to enumerate what it would take to design a totally self-sufficient community without scavenging old wrecks or anything like that which might be available in a post-disaster scenario. You'd need to be in an area with a working oil well or two, and preferably a working gas well too. Just blue skying it. I believe that 40 people could operate a working refinery, pumping and storage yard for the fuel and the LP gas. You'd need sufficient fields for flax and cotton, fields under cultivation for winter fodder for your sheep, cattle, milk cows, and working stock, as well as grazing land for their summer feed. Depending on your community size, this could demand a huge outlay in manpower and expense. The fields of wheat, rice, and corn would have to be large enough to support all the people working in the dedicated industries. Don't forget the numerous garden plots that feed the people yet suck away the labor force. You'll be wanting a dairy operation, a cheese house, an animal husbandry operation to breed and raise the young, a glass maker capable of producing window glass, a sawmill, a butchery, and a meat preservation operation of some form, a concrete plant, and a heavy steel casting operation. Why heavy steel castings? You have to cast and mill the engine blocks for your tractors and the heavy beams for your backhoes and end loaders, of course. Industrial milling machines need fine tolerances and tool steel bits, along with oilers to keep from burning the work pieces. They require precision screw tables for positioning and feeding the working stock too. Who's going to make your hydraulic pumps, hoses, and cylinders? What kind of tolerances and technologies go into them? Not to mention the hydraulic fluid. Now you're into the bootstrap problem. You make the tools to make the tools to make the tools to make the product. What? Forget the tractors. We'll go with horses, you say? You still need the plows, cultivators, planters, sickle bar mowers, and rakes. If you regress technologically to the sickle, you have to dedicate a lot more manpower to the fields. Automated farm equipment no doubt gave us the opportunity to build the cities because less people were needed to feed us. Anyway, it's much simpler to rely on an existing technology base to get operational, isn't it? By my estimates, we're talking about well over 1,000 people here, and probably closing in on 20,000. It's a vicious circle. The manpower support demands go up with the population which are needed to provide the manpower. Once you hit a critical limit, you need civil services and regulations. Who builds the streets, runs the water lines, provides the clean water, takes care of the trash and the sewage, and runs the electrical grid? Do you need streetlights? Who cleans the horse shit off the streets? You don't have a village anymore. You've got an 1840 city. Not town, city. Once you're that big, you need trade to support the city. You're past the equilibrium point and into grow or die. That means industry and shipping, warehousing, and materials supply. Where do you draw the line and say no more? Electrification? Internal combustion? High-pressure steam? Steel-hulled ships? There were a lot of cultural and industrial accelerators that kicked things into a higher gear in the development of our culture and economy. Some were cascades, such as the Bessemer, which provided massive quantities of uniform quality steel. The rolling mills took that steel and made the rails for the railroads. The railroads moved food, raw materials, and finished goods in and out of the cities, allowing them to reach a hyperinflationary rate of growth. The steel spines of the skyscrapers also required a uniform quality of steel. The rotary cement ball mills of 1885 or thereabouts depended on sophisticated steel technology to work, again a legacy of the Bessemers for their raw material. These mills yielded many magnitudes of more Portland cement production per hour than any previous engineering had developed, and of a better quality. Cement and concrete construction boomed. What failures in technological advances can we theorize that would put the brakes on the rocket that our technology has become? Here's a few of my favorites. What if rolling mills were considered man-killers and never gained favor in the steel industry? No rails would mean limited or no railroads, hence no economical bulk transport services, hence no large cities. The rails would be comprised of flat bars of steel attached to wooden rails, requiring near-weekly maintenance. There goes your profits. The Eisenhower freeway system of the 1950s may have been implemented 100 years before in that case. It certainly would have restricted the movement of troops and war materials during the Civil War. If nobody made that great leap that put zinc anodes on ships at sea, then brass and steel would still be unusable for hulls or propellers. We'd still be using wooden-hulled paddle boats, and it's possible that the concept of the jet engine would never have been discovered. It's a reach, but consider the propeller in the restricted domain of a tube. Now employ a following propeller on the same shaft and a combustion chamber. Pinch the tube at the proper place and inject the fuel. You've got the makings of a turbocharger or a jet engine. If propellers weren't used in current technologies, it only figures that they'd fade out of thought, out of sight, out of mind. If internal combustion never got off the ground, either for technological reasons, coolant or lubrication failure, or aesthetic ones, they stink. We'd still be driving Stanley steamers or their descendants. If the early technology caused undersea oil drilling to fail a few more times than it did, the concept could be shelved, limiting us to the oil reserves beneath the land. Even if fuel prices go up, external combustion is much more forgiving of its heat source. If the last artificial antibiotic to be discovered created was chloramphenicol, we'd not have superbugs that may yet prove to be the last living thing on the planet. I began thinking that life at 35 miles per hour may not be such a bad thing. Mark got a phone call from Trina, who seemed interested in the operation. I took one look at his ratty old pickup and took him down to the Ford dealer for a brand new F-250. I had the dealership put his name on the title and handed him the keys. I told him to pick up a couple new industrial weed whackers, gas cans, and ear protectors for next year's maintenance. Trina liked the place, liked the deal, and liked Mark enough to stay on. I gave Mark a Christmas present that year of a 3-season room attached to his house, with a hot tub built within. The second rendezvous was a smashing success except for one issue. 2 teens were playing handles, doing their level best to shatter the handles of the tomahawks thrown by the other competitors. Tim called one of the teens on it. "You're intentionally trying to mess up this meat for other people by breaking their hawk handles. It's time that you stop and pay the people for the replacements." The kid smirked at Tim. He didn't notice Kim standing behind him. After all, they were only 13. The troublemakers were all of 20 to 22. "What? You're going to make me?" "Yep. You've got 2 choices. You pay for the handles and apologize to the people you've pissed off, or I take care of it." "Right. Sure you will, kid." They turned to leave the hawk range. Tim took 3 steps and launched into a flying kick, nailing the kid behind his forward knee. He dropped like a rock. Tim rolled to his feet. Kim tossed him a single stick. "It's time to pay the piper." 6 blows later, there were 2 broken shins, 2 broken wrists, and a concussion. One of the other throwers wondered out loud, "Who is that kid?" Kim heard him. "He's my brother. We live here." She nodded at the kid on the ground. "He's lucky. Harvey made us promise no blood." She walked after her brother. One of the hawk throwers noted to the rest, "Good dog soldiers here." Another asked, "Should we call for help?" "Hell no. He'll do till morning. He had a friend here. Let's see how good a friend he is." I heard about it later and wondered if there'd be any fallout. I never heard a peep. I guess once they hit 20 they lost their precious snowflake status. I roped off a section of beach and taught all comers how to use an ATL. I had a couple styrofoam deer targets designed for archery. By the end of the rendezvous, I threw the pieces in the dumpster. We had 60 filled campsites and 2 vendors. We got a lot of wall tents, a couple of pyramid tents from the Gold Rush era, a couple Civil War era Baker tents, half-wall tents, and a half-dozen teepees. I was surprised that I didn't see any plowpoint tents. They make good fire reflectors, and adding another tarp across the supporting rope gives you a teepee-like structure with a smoke hole at the top. I've used them many times in frosty weather, but they're best for the young that don't mind scrabbling around on hands and knees. A tall tripod goes up above where the fire pit is to be, and a hanging pot holds it down. A longish rope is laid directly over the tripod and tied off, front and back. The plowpoint tent's rise depends on the height of that tripod. That's what I planned on teaching the scouts to build and use, as the canvas was not specially cut or seamed, and a painter's tarp would do admirably. They'd spend more on the rope and stakes than on the tent canvas. A couple guys got together and bridged their sites with tarps for a protected area around a communal fire. That's where a lot of the stories, songs, and drinking went down. I had a small canvas shelter erected in front of my tent for a more introspective crowd to use. Juliana came down most nights to sit with me and partake of the fire and the atmosphere and a little rum. I thought about building a beehive oven and cabin for communal use, as they did at Bloody Lake Rendezvous near Woodford, Wisconsin. On bad nights, when tents collapsed, the cabin floor could be opened up for sleeping space and the fireplace lit. Bloody Lake had a one-room cabin. I had no problem springing for a 3-room floor plan. We'd just use one of the plans our benefactors had left from the other pioneer villages. We'd make it a project for the next rendezvous. The year after that, we'd build 2 beehive ovens. After that, I'd have to scratch for a project or 2. I did a little fire starting, a little flint knapping, and a little ATL spear making. I sold a lot of smoked meat, beef, pork, and root vegetables to those that didn't want to go to town to resupply. I thought it was pretty cool when some woman asked where did these carrots come from. I walked her over to the garden, pointed, and said there. Nuff said. They got all giddy about the organic, locally grown produce. I got rid of a couple cases of canned Jared tomatoes and pickles, as well as fresh carrots, turnips, and potatoes. I held out on our small chest freezer full of fresh herbs. When that crowd found out we raised our own beef and pork, they went noisily nuts. I discovered a high-demand niche market. We'd have to expand the next few years and add to our chest freezer farm. Before that, however, I talked it over with Juliana, Mark, and Trina. Now that Trina was helping out, we figured that we could expand our beef and pork operations without much distress. We may even raise a bison or 2 for meat. The demand certainly was there. I called around to determine the availability of grain and fodder. We'd be all right. We expanded the calf mangers that winter. At the Thanksgiving dinner, Mark and Trina were looking insufferably happy with each other. I could see Juliana working herself into a bad case of the blues. After dinner, I wrapped her up in an arm and took her to the hot tub, where I loved up on her by giving her a back rub, then holding her in my lap and hugging her. I took her to bed that night, just to sleep, but I held her in my arms until morning. Upon waking, I gave her a hug, then went for my tea. She smiled as she sat across from me. I've been lonely for so long that it took having my nose rubbed in it to remember what it was like to have companionship. She took a sip of her drink, then smiled at me once more. Thanks for making me feel good again. I reached across the table and took her hand. Believe me, it wasn't such a horrible task. I wouldn't mind doing it again. A lot. It was almost like an endorphin rush, but it was calmer. It was the feeling of security. When Clara came to visit, she said the change in atmosphere was noticeable. She'd been staying away because things felt uncomfortable around the farm. That was gone now. We welcomed her presence. During the week, Juliana spent more nights than not in my bed with me. I dare say we both slept better for it. The kids decided to comment on our new relationship. One morning they came down singing Harvey and Juliana, sittin' in a tree, KSS Genji. I hadn't told their mom, but I came upon them up in the hayloft experimenting one warm summer day. Well, they looked pretty practiced to be experimenting. Kimmy and Timmy up in the loft, stroking and poking to make it soft. I got a couple of real red faces and open mouths. Mama just shook a finger at them and said, "No grandkids." I smiled my innocent wouldn't say shit if I had a mouthful smile and said, "Gotta watch those glass houses guys. They didn't quite know how to deal with us for a while." Hell, you'd think that they'd been the first ones caught playing stinkfinger. Come spring, we bought 20 head of weaned white-faced calves. We took our time, but Mark and I quadrupled the fenced grazing land. Within the split rail fence, we set up a temporary fence, then plowed and planted half the land in clover. I bought one hell of a lot of chest freezers and put in electrical lines to operate them. Mark and Trina prepped the garden and took care of the grounds wonderfully that year. All of us contributed to seeding and transplanting the tomato plants into the field. We'd finished building out the village, and we were fine-tuning it. We built another small wing onto the visitors' center, which had dioramas showing the local birds in their natural settings. We included scenes illustrating the ecologies and differences between freshwater lowlands, saltwater or brackish lowlands, and tidal marshes. We brought aboard a lot of the hardliners that way. I think the kids really sold it when, at the grand opening, they commented that when they were exploring the island, they'd go up the little streams or out on the tidal flats and catch dinner with a net, put it in a tin can with some seawater, and boil it until done. They did it the same way the old-timers did when they were kids. It gave the older folks a bridge back to their youth, and that wasn't a bad thing. It didn't take much to get the kids to do a couple of survival demonstrations for the friends group. I think a couple of published articles went out examining how well-taught kids could go out on their own and live off the land without scarring it or leaving any sign that they were there, or at least sign that would last over a week or so. That summer I bought a bale of washed wool and taught the kids how to use a huge wooden pan and pestle to muddle wool into felt, then expand and thicken the pad until they had enough to match the pattern they were using. From that point they could cut it to form, sew on a waterproof sole, and sew up a pair of mucklucks, ready to be waterproofed with wax. A company near the Great Lakes still sells ankle-length heavy wool overshirts and canvas overshirts to go over the wool for winter camping and snowshoeing. I tried to dig up their website, but failed. Instead, I described the garments. They were designed so that the wearer could squat down and hug their knees inside the coverings and get some sleep, even in a bad storm. Their snowshoes would keep them out of the cold. Mark, Trina, and I cut and assembled the winter walls for the picnic enclosure, tested setting them up, and set them away in the barn. I invited the local Boy Scout troop in for a winter camp the first week in November, just after the last rendezvous folk left. I promised to invite them in for the first week of June the next year as well. We'd do some skills cross-training and get rid of those garish commercial tents that they insisted on standardizing on. They were too heavy for the utility they provided. The Army could afford the heaters and fuel for squad-sized tents. Local scouting groups had better uses for their cash. Besides, whether you're a scout or a leader, if you're camping you're supposed to interact with nature, not the insides of a canvas house. If the wind came up and they started getting hypothermic, then the picnic shelter would be turned into a warming center and a sleeping shelter. We would pre-pile firewood next to the fireplace when the time came. It was a calm summer night. I was in a wood recliner down at the boathouse, listening to the waves and taking an occasional pull on my bourbon and Coke. Juliana walked up behind me and laid her hands down on my shoulders. I rubbed my cheek against her wrist. I said, "I've been thinking." What about? I've come to the conclusion that I've been either consciously or unconsciously disassociating myself from this place. It's pretty much running on its own, with only a touch now and again to keep it balanced. I've been wondering what the next step will be, both for me and this place. And maybe for you, too. I raised my knees as she sat in my lap, resting her back against them and relaxing, looking at me. You're going somewhere with this, but I have no idea where. I've been thinking about a national registry for reenactment or historical villages. They'd have to be in several classes or groups. Some are nothing more than huge dioramas depicting the era that they're focusing on, with placards describing what the organizers wish to convey, much like a high school science fair. Some are weekend and holiday focused, opening for business with reenactors working the exhibits, giving impromptu lectures, and answering the questions of the public. Some are seasonal or year-round exhibits with many more people involved in the demonstrations. These usually run scripted events and charge an admission fee. They make some reasonable attempt at educating the public. Some are associated with museums and are only accessible via tours with guides and have experts or researchers on staff, such as the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago with its German U-boat and the coal mine exhibit. If a site has a unique or well-researched historical exhibit that could be considered rare or unique, it should gather acclaim and notoriety. If a site does a fantastic job at costuming and tasks, such as Old Sturbridge, they likewise should be acknowledged for it. I think it's past time for a national register of historical displays, different from the Register of Historic Sites. Juliana asked, who's going to run it? This idea isn't either small in scope or easily manageable. It'll require site visits. I replied, I was thinking of the National Museum in Washington, D.C., or even getting the Smithsonian to manage it. If I pledge $3 million a year at it for 10 years, that should get it off the ground. Hopefully I can bludgeon them into writing a no-dues rule into the charter, as a lot of these places just don't have the spare cash to spend that way. They could certainly use the advertising, but not at the expense of a rapacious yearly fee that, no doubt, would mostly be siphoned off for administrative fees. There should be an easy solution for that. She said, if the administrative fees are fixed in the charter and increases are linked to the cost of living, the trustees couldn't vote themselves the nest egg. Good idea. Tell you what. Let's get a lawyer to draw up a sample contract, then let's get you a pretty dress or two, then we'll shop it around DC. If we get some Ivy League colleges with extensive history departments behind it, we'll have a better chance of getting in the door. We were told that we had a better chance getting it done in stages. Since I had no experience in the field, I bowed to their advice. First, the charter was approved by the Maine Chief Justice. Next, greased by a contribution, a bill was introduced into the Maine state legislature. It must have been during the silly season, as it passed without much dissent, seeing as how it was self-funded for the first decade. We had amicus curiae, or friends of the court briefings brought up before the various state legislatures to spread the bill to extend over the various original 13 colonies, turned states. We hired proponents registered in each state to shine the light on our project. It gained a bit of momentum, then seemed to collapse. There wasn't enough money being spread around to grease the wheels. We waited. Just before the elections were held, we pushed the bill once more, under a slightly different name and using education as its umbrella. It passed the various legislatures under the what-the-hell attitude of the pre-election legislatures. We worked on a one-state, one-vote basis, running a pseudo-senate of our own in judging, grading, and approving the various sites and exhibits. We worked on a point value, and a certain amount of advertising was spent for every 3 points per site. Some got none, some got quite a bit. We slowly moved to incorporate states that had Revolutionary War battles, important forts, and Civil War battles. Quite a bit of local interest was stirred up when news of this project and its advertising funds crept out. I had to increase the funding to $5 million a year to give them any hope of a reasonable budget. Several corporations donated to the fund, and we had a few universities donate a trifle to get their names into the evaluation teams. It became something of a media hit with a television crew accompanying one of the teams evaluating the sites. The unique or nearly unique displays which some of the sites possessed were highlighted by the filming crews which provided that site free advertising. The viewers didn't know that we were cherry-picking some of the best places to show off. The thing took off with a life of its own. Once the project was written up on the internet, the advertising became self-sustaining, available to anyone with access to an internet connection, computer, browser, or search engine. I understand that quite a few doctoral theses came out of those displays. The kids were nearly out of school and were looking around for directions to proceed in their higher education. I had broadened their camping skills to include LED lights with marvelous efficiencies and incredibly long-lived batteries, the use of water filters, bleach and polar pure iodine for water purification, lightweight coated nylon tents and tarps, navigation with maps and GPS, simple vehicle maintenance, shortwave radio theory, use and protocols, as well as using firearms for hunting for the table as well as on the target range. They had the eye for the long distances that I'd lost long ago. I suggested that they join the military for a short time, just to see how stupid a lot of uncaring people could be in a group and how stupid a person could be and still be in charge of others. Whatever they decided, I was going to fund their further education. I hoped, however, that they'd do the military bit first, as it would give them the ability to swallow a professor's bullshit and regurgitate it at will, then completely forget about it once the course was over. I warned them about science versus pseudoscience, despite people's rabid belief in a subject's misproven validity. After all, once you've spent 8 years of your life swallowing things like sociology to get your PhD, you wouldn't dare admit that it was all crap. I have no doubt that you, rational reader, could name several other schools of thought off the top of your head that, logically, are perpetually swirling down the drain, screaming all the while at the unfairness of it all. To understand how such a thing can hold its own in the face of the bright light of critical thought, remember the lesson of the big lie. With Juliana and I even further removed from the day-to-day operations of the village, we hired Clara to act as our agent in residence. Then we went on vacation. We hired a fully crewed 50-foot sailboat to carry us around the Gulf of Mexico, seeing the sights, eating the foods, and watching the people. We kept in touch with the lawyers and the kids, and kept in contact with Clara. I bought an enormously expensive satellite phone, which normally sat in its charger gathering dust. Damn it. We fished for the big stuff, and generally screwed off. We liked the climate so much that we had a villa built up in the hills behind Luquillo, on the extreme northeast portion of Puerto Rico. We were generous in hiring locals to cook, clean, and garden the place, but I'd learned my lesson. I kept my hands off. No more gardening. I had a wing built lined with bookcases and big museum-quality display cases. I had my jade and other treasures packed by a professional conservator and shipped, along with all my books and the contents of the gun safe, to the villa. We hosted a few parties, grilled our fair share of beef, pork, chicken, and fish, as well as drank our fair share of wine and other alcoholic drinks. We never had a problem with thieves. Perhaps this will illustrate why. One day I asked the cook for spit-roasted goat for Sunday, and asked her which animal to butcher. She pointed out a young ram about 1,400 feet away. I got my .50 cal rifle down, loaded it, set it against a tree fork, and took the goat's head off. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a newspaper beneath the rifle to protect the table's finish. I was meticulously cleaning it when one of the gardeners sidled up to me and sat down, clutching a cup of coffee. "Senor, what was your job before you came here?" I kept a little smile on my face as I detailed the action with Q-tips. I was a hunter. I could see him thinking, How did a man make enough money as a hunter to retire to a nice place like this? Senor, may I ask, what did you hunt? Oh, I do so love a good setup. I kept my smile as I looked him in the eye. People. He looked at me aghast. My great-great-great-grandfather was a sniper in the United States war between the states. One of my great-great-grandfathers killed Indians from so far away that the native warriors could not see the smoke from his rifle. My great-grandfather hunted for the table. My grandfather shot down German bombers from the deck of a ship. Me? I blinked and shrugged. I swat them down like flies. He crossed himself and fled. Juliana sat down. Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt off elderberries. I laughed until I cried. He did not. I most strenuously objected. He smelled of Old Spice. Loads of it. She whispered to me, where did that line of shit come from? I nipped her ear and quietly said, most of it's true. I swat flies down like flies. All the rest is documented. I have proof. We never got married, but we carried on as if we were. The kids paid us the occasional visit to catch us up with their lives. Mark and Trina got married. I signed over the house jointly to Mark, Trina, and Clara, and to bless them a decent lifestyle, I gave them a check for $20 million in operating expenses. The Northerners took over the running of the displays. Mark and Trina agreed to continue holding the rendezvous as it provided a lucrative outlet for their meat and produce. We were heading to Houston. I'd leased a plane at the local airport. We were in Texas, answer to the city by the bay, for a month or so. We wanted to celebrate Christmas there. Juliana wanted to get in some shopping, and I wasn't adverse to it, either. We caught many a glance. I thought that we made a rather good-looking couple strolling down to the Galleria, her in her dress, pearls and wrap, me in my suit, fedora and cane. I caught a glimpse of our reflection in a storefront glass and pointed it out to her. We looked like we belonged in The Great Gatsby. I felt that we appeared as if we came from a different time. A better time. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.